They sent him an invitation to the 10-year reunion, not because they wanted to see him, but because they wanted to humiliate him one last time. The boy they called the Ghost, the one they mocked, ignored, and wrote off as invisible. They laughed as they added his name to the guest list, already imagining him walking in alone, out of place, embarrassed. But when the night arrived and the ground began to shake, no one was laughing anymore. What happened next would leave 200 people speechless. Before we move forward, if you genuinely value kindness, second chances, and the strength of compassion, be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Linda's Hot Stories. Also, let us know in the comments where you're tuning in from today. What country or city are you watching from? The rooftop bar hung above the city like a trophy suspended in amber light. Golden hour poured through floor-to-ceiling windows, transforming ordinary glass into liquid gold, catching the rims of expensive whiskey tumblers and painting long shadows across the polished table where 4 men sat in comfortable arrogance. Below them the city sprawled in all its indifferent glory, towers piercing the horizon like declarations of wealth and power. Pierce Wellington occupied his chair the way successful men do, with casual ownership, one arm draped over the backrest as if even furniture existed to accommodate him. His navy blazer probably cost what most people earned in a month, and his smile carried the hollow warmth of someone who had perfected the art of appearing genuine while feeling nothing. Real estate had made him wealthy, but it hadn't made him kind. Kellen Black held his phone like a weapon of self-documentation, angling it to capture the sunset behind him with practiced precision. 3 photos in rapid succession, each calculated to appear effortlessly successful. His entire existence was curated for consumption, every experience filtered through the lens of how it would appear to an audience that existed only in digital form. Across from him sat Rhett Davies, whose charcoal suit and perfectly knotted tie announced his profession before he spoke. Corporate attorney, the kind who wore skepticism like armor and viewed every conversation as a negotiation to be won. He swirled his whiskey with deliberate slowness, watching the ice shift as if his drink required strategic consideration. Dax Ryder completed the quartet, younger but perhaps most dangerous, lean and sharp-featured with the restless energy of someone whose tech startup had exploded into success. He checked his watch constantly, not because he had somewhere to be, but because his entire identity was constructed around the belief that time was currency and he was wealthy beyond measure. They had been meeting like this for months, planning the class of 2015 reunion with enthusiasm that revealed their arrested development. People who had truly moved on didn't spend this much time recreating high school hierarchies. Pierce stopped scrolling on his tablet and something in his expression shifted, a predatory smile spreading slowly across his face like oil on water. He turned the screen toward the others with deliberate movements. "Wait," he said, his voice carrying malicious inspiration. "What about Julian Vance?" Kellen glanced up from his phone, squinting at the screen before recognition hit him. His eyes widened and laughter burst from his throat, too loud for the elegant space, drawing annoyed glances from nearby tables. "Oh my God," he gasped between fits. "Julian Vance. I completely forgot he even existed." Rhett leaned forward, studying the yearbook photo with an expression caught between disbelief and contempt. "The kid who ate lunch alone in the computer lab every single day?" he asked mockingly. "Are you actually serious?" Dax grinned, his eyes lighting up with cruel brilliance. "This is absolutely perfect," he said, tapping his knuckles on the table. "We sent him an invitation. He shows up thinking people actually want to see him, that maybe things have changed, that maybe he matters now." The memories appeared in fragments, quick cuts of cruelty that felt less like nostalgia and more like evidence. The cafeteria first, that universal theater of high school hierarchy. Julian sat alone in the corner, his back pressed against the wall as if he could disappear into it. A thick manual opened before him, the title reading Advanced Rotorcraft Systems and Flight Mechanics, marking him as different, as someone whose aspirations existed beyond teenage social acceptance. Around him, tables erupted with laughter and chaos, but none of it touched him. He had learned that invisibility was safer than visibility. The next memory was more violent. His locker stood vandalized, The word loser spray-painted across the metal in thick, dripping letters, the paint still wet and running down in uneven streaks. Julian stood before it, staring at the word with an expression that revealed nothing. He didn't cry, didn't shout, didn't give them satisfaction. He simply opened the locker, retrieved his books, and walked away with steady composure. Behind him, students watched and laughed, Kellen among them, recording it on his phone. The most painful fragment came last. Career day in the gymnasium, rows of booths representing different futures. Students wandered between them with varying interest. In the far corner stood a booth with a banner reading U.S. Army Aviation. Behind the table sat a recruiter in service uniform, patient and professional. Only one person stood there. Julian leaned forward, asking a question the camera couldn't capture, and the recruiter handed him a pamphlet about Apache helicopter pilot training, which he accepted carefully, as if it were precious and fragile. Across the gymnasium, students pointed and erupted in mocking laughter, Pierce performing an exaggerated salute that sent others into hysterics. Julian didn't look at them. He simply thanked the recruiter with quiet dignity, tucked the pamphlet into his bag, and walked away. Kellen picked up the thread immediately, his laughter transforming into something sharper, more calculated. "And we get to remind everyone exactly how far we've all come," he said, pausing to find the perfect phrase. The contrast alone would be chef's kiss. Pierce was already typing, adding Julian's name to the digital guest list with theatrical flair. "Invitation to the class of 2015 reunion," he narrated aloud. "At the Cascadia Grand Estate, black tie is required." He looked up, grinning. "He'll show up in something from a department store clearance rack. Guaranteed." Rhett smirked, lifting his whiskey glass. "If he even shows up at all." Kellen raised his own glass with absolute certainty. "Oh, he'll show up," he said quietly. "People like Julian always show up. They always hope things have changed." They clinked their glasses together, the sound sharp and bright, sealing their pact with casual cruelty. Pierce tapped the final button and a notification appeared. Invitation delivered. The Cascadia Grand Estate appeared like something from a dream of wealth, all marble columns and old-world architecture wrapped in strings of Edison bulbs glowing like captured fireflies. A red carpet stretched from valet stand to entrance, flanked by hedges sculpted into perfect spirals. Jazz music drifted from inside, mingling with laughter and conversation and the gentle clinking of expensive glassware. Luxury vehicles arrived in steady succession, valets in crisp uniforms rushing to open doors for guests emerging in designer dresses and tailored suits. Pierce, Kellen, Rhett, and Dax positioned themselves near the entrance like hosts at a coronation, greeting arrivals with wide smiles and enthusiastic embraces, performative warmth that looked perfect in photographs but felt hollow up close. Kellen leaned closer to Dax, voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "He RSVP'd." "Yes," he confirmed. "I checked this morning." "No +1, he added with satisfaction. "Of course not." Pierce checked his watch, frowning slightly. "He's late," he observed. "Probably couldn't find anything appropriate to wear." They laughed together, sharp and easy, then moved inside. The ballroom was magnificent. Crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings, casting prismatic light across polished marble floors. Round tables draped in white linen filled the space, each topped with elaborate floral arrangements perfuming the air with roses and lavender. At the far end, a massive projection screen displayed a rotating slideshow of yearbook photos, prom pictures, victories, candid moments from a decade ago. The band played smooth jazz, couples swayed on the dance floor, and conversations flowed easily, lubricated by champagne and nostalgia. Pierce stood near the bar with Kellen, both watching the screen with predatory anticipation. Then it appeared. Julian's senior photo filled the screen, and the effect was immediate. The boy looked fragile, almost ghostly, with oversized glasses that dominated his pale face and dark hair that seemed hastily combed. He wore a suit jacket that swallowed his thin frame, but his eyes held something unsettling, staring directly forward with intensity, as if looking not at the photographer but through him into something farther away that only he could see. Laughter erupted across the ballroom, not cruel exactly, but thoughtless, the kind that comes easily when people recognize shared memories of hierarchy. Rhett appeared beside Dax, both holding fresh drinks. $20 says he doesn't show, Rhett said quietly. Dax studied the photo, then shook his head. I'll take that bet. He'll show. Looking exactly like that, just 10 years older and sadder. They shook hands, grinning, just as the music suddenly cut out. The silence hit like a physical force, conversations dying mid-sentence as heads turned toward the stage where the band stood frozen, instruments lowered, staring toward the windows with expressions of confusion. Then came the sound. Low at first, almost subsonic, a mechanical thrumming that seemed to rise from the earth itself. It grew steadily, rhythmically, a deep percussion that didn't belong to any music, any engine the guests recognized. The crystal chandeliers began to tremble, their 1,000 prisms catching light and scattering it across suddenly nervous faces. Someone laughed uncertainly. Is this part of the entertainment? The thrumming intensified, louder now, accompanied by a high-pitched whine that set teeth on edge. The marble floor began to vibrate, champagne glasses rattling against tabletops, flower arrangements trembling in their vases. The massive windows that lined the ballroom showed the darkened lawn outside, and now they too began to shake in their frames. Pierce grabbed Kellen's arm. What the hell is that? The sound grew monstrous, overwhelming, a roar of turbines and displaced air that made the chandeliers swing violently overhead. Hairline cracks appeared in the corners of the windows, spreading like frozen lightning. Women covered their ears, men backed away from the glass, and the entire crowd surged toward the center of the ballroom. Then the French doors exploded inward in a hurricane of wind and dust. The doors didn't simply open. They were blown back on their hinges by a wall of pressure and debris, white curtains whipping horizontally, programs and napkins swirling into tornadic chaos. The roar became deafening, all-consuming, drowning out screams and shouts as guests shielded their faces against the onslaught of wind and dust. Through the chaos, lights appeared. Blinding white landing lights cutting through the billowing cloud like searchlights from another world, painting the ballroom in stark, moving shadows. The sound was apocalyptic now, the distinctive whop-whop-whop of twin turboshaft engines at full power. Someone near the window shouted words that were lost in the noise, pointing toward the front lawn with an expression of absolute disbelief. The dust began to settle, and through the clearing air impossibly, the shape emerged. NAH-64 Apache attack helicopter descended onto the pristine lawn like a predator claiming territory, its tandem cockpit glinting in the estate's decorative lighting. Its stub wings bristling with weapon pylons, its tail rotor screaming. The landing gear touched down with mechanical precision, and the downwash from the rotors carved deep furrows into the manicured grass, sending a final wave of debris across the terrace. The engines wound down to idle, the rotors still spinning overhead, and 200 people stood in absolute, frozen silence. No one moved. No one spoke. No one breathed. The canopy opened, figure emerged from the front seat of the Apache, moving with practiced efficiency, boots hitting the ground with solid authority. He reached back into the cockpit, retrieved his helmet, and tucked it under his arm with the casual competence of someone who had performed this action 1,000 times. Julian Vance. But not the Julian Vance they remembered. This man stood tall in a clean olive-green flight suit, the fabric marked with patches that told a story the crowd could barely comprehend. Unit insignia on his shoulder. Wings on his chest. Service ribbons in neat rows. His frame had filled out, shoulders broad, posture perfect, every movement controlled and deliberate. He walked toward the ballroom with measured strides, his expression calm, unreadable, his eyes scanning the frozen crowd with the same intensity from his yearbook photo, but now backed by something undeniable. The whispers started like wildfire. Is that Julian Vance? Apache pilot. That's an Apache. Oh my God. Someone near the back, a former classmate who'd joined the Marines, spoke louder, his voice carrying authority. That's not just any pilot. Those patches. He's decorated. Combat missions. That's a distinguished flying cross ribbon. One of the best, someone else whispered. You have to be one of the absolute best. Julian reached the terrace and stopped, his eyes finding Pierce in the crowd. The crowd parted instinctively as Julian entered, creating a corridor between him and the four men who stood frozen near the bar. Pierce's face had drained of color. Kellen's phone hung limp in his hand, forgotten. Rhett gripped his glass so tightly his knuckles had gone white. Dax simply stared, mouth slightly open. Julian stopped 3 feet away, his voice quiet but carrying perfectly in the stunned silence. You sent me an invitation, he said. I'm here. Pierce opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. No words came. Movement at the terrace entrance drew every eye. Another figure in uniform appeared, older, his bearing radiating command authority. The silver oak leaves on his shoulders identified him immediately. Major. He walked directly to Julian's side, then turned to face the crowd. Good evening, the major said, his voice trained to project. I'm Major Elias Hawke, 1st Battalion, 227th Aviation Regiment. I apologize for the dramatic entrance, but Chief Warrant Officer Vance here is on a tight schedule. He paused, letting the rank register. Some of you may remember Julian from high school. What you don't know is that 6 months ago, CW3 Vance led a rescue operation in hostile territory, extracting 12 wounded soldiers under heavy fire. He was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross for extraordinary heroism. He's one of the finest Apache pilots in the United States Army. The silence was absolute, crushing. Julian's eyes never left Pierce. He reached into his flight suit pocket and pulled out his phone, swiping once, then holding up the screen. The quartet could see their own text thread, their jokes, their bets, their cruel planning laid bare. I read every joke, Julian said quietly. Every bet. Every message about how I'd show up looking pathetic, how you'd finally get to remind me of my place. He lowered the phone. I came to see if any of you had changed in 10 years. He paused, his expression unchanged. You haven't. Julian turned to leave, but a woman stepped forward from the crowd, her evening gown shimmering in the chandelier light. Nicole Harper, class vice president, her eyes glistening. Julian, she said softly. I'm sorry. I watched them do it. All of it. And I never said a word. I should have. He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded once. Thank you, he said simply. Major Hawke extended his hand, and Julian shook it firmly. Then, with practiced precision, both men snapped to attention and exchanged salutes, the gesture sharp and formal, a language the crowd couldn't fully understand but felt the weight of nonetheless. Julian walked back toward the Apache, his silhouette framed against the aircraft's warning lights. He climbed into the cockpit with fluid efficiency, secured his helmet, and the engines immediately began to spool up. The rotors accelerated, the sound building again, and the helicopter lifted smoothly from the scarred lawn, nose dipping slightly as it climbed. The crowd watched from the terrace as the Apache rose into the night sky, its lights shrinking, becoming smaller and smaller until it was just a single blinking point against the darkness, then nothing at all. Inside, the ballroom emptied quickly, conversations hushed and awkward. Pierce, Kellen, Rhett, and Dax stood motionless, unable to look at each other. The lawn remained, torn and gouged, deep grooves carved into the perfect grass where 15 tons of military aircraft had landed. The estate's floodlights illuminated the damage like a monument, permanent and undeniable. A reminder that some things couldn't be erased. If this story resonated with you, we'd be grateful if you take a moment to like, share your thoughts below, and subscribe to Linda's Hot Stories. Your engagement allows us to continue sharing meaningful stories that inspire. Before you leave, we'd love to hear from you. What did you learn from this story?